The soldier heard the buzzing of the drone descending over the ruins of Pokrovski and screamed from the impact of excruciating pain. His companion, in a desperate effort, tried to help him, aware that staying there for too long increased their risk of dying. Together, they had infiltrated the city under the cover of fog, betting that the low visibility would blind the drones. But the weather cleared up as the conditions improved. The confrontation became inevitable, forcing them to rely on just 2 weeks of precarious training, a recipe for disaster. Still, they pressed on with determination and courage, ambushing Ukrainians and taking out defenders as they seized new sectors of the city, which they had been fighting for since 2024. These were the final moments of the battles for Pokrovski, when desperate civilians pleaded for help from the Ukrainian troops. One of them was seriously wounded. Barely able to move, the Max Pro vehicle drove right past, creating a sense of helplessness among those who refused to leave their homes, even without water or electricity, and under the threat of Russian bombs. Further ahead, the armored vehicle slowed down. They still refused to leave their homes. One of them was... Without needing to maneuver, he turned around quickly. The civilians, relieved, made the wounded comfortable for rescue, while the others remained ready to return home with their dog. The Max Pro continued on its way under the impact of bombs pounding the road, making the soldiers and the wounded civilian feel the vibration of each explosion. The rescue narrowly avoided ending in tragedy. Russian bombs had been falling on Pokrovsk for over a year. Moscow's advance was slow but relentless. Although the territorial gains in Donetsk were greater in 2025 than in the previous year, the average rate of progress was only 15%, at 70 meters per day, a slower and more costly pace than any conflict of the 20th century. Surpassing the trench stagnation of World War I, the Russians maintained massive bombardments to clear the way, while the infantry advanced in short steps into Ukraine. This did not mean victory, but rather the need to wage an exhausting defensive war against one of the world's greatest military powers. All that was left for them was to retreat and destroy as many enemies as possible. The Russian forces were already occupying the forests around Pokrovsk, being harassed by kamikaze drones. Small squads took advantage of the dense fog to infiltrate Ukrainian defenses, but when the sky cleared, death regained its sight. Many managed to get through, but the Ukrainians hunted those without safe shelter. A small group of drone pilots was able to eliminate dozens of Russians who reached the outskirts. Even under the lethal swarm flying over the city, it was impressive to see images of men walking alone through that hell, following orders, under the constant risk of being hit. The buzzing of that swarm became the soundtrack of the soldiers' nightmares. An absurd amount of equipment flew through the smoke of the explosions. These flying pests searched for victims all over Pokrovsk, making it almost impossible to distinguish allies from enemies. They were kamikazes, bombers, and spies, all lying in wait for a distracted soldier. The chaos was such that 2 Ukrainians, upon noticing the excitement of a drone, got confused and mistook it for Allied equipment. The moment they calmed down and turned their backs, the device dove at them, sealing an easy kill. While some drones acted as direct killers, others served as eyes for artillery, identifying coordinates and passing on locations for projectile delivery. The Russian arsenal was vast. The two S-19 MSTA fired up to 8 rounds of 152 mm per minute at a distance of 25 kilometers, saturating Ukrainian positions. The two S-Tupan, operating closer, launched 240 130 kg projectiles, designed to demolish bunkers and concrete fortifications that withstood conventional artillery. Despite the terrifying craters left by air bombardments, soldiers often survived, making kamikaze drones essential to finish what heavy metal couldn't solve. Thus, the slow Russian advance continued. Under the fog, they arrived on motorcycles, junk cars, and small jeeps, almost destroyed by time and by what they faced on the roads. The overcast sky brought the necessary calm for them to move within the city. The state of the troop was not a symbol of defeat, but of the sacrifices they were willing to make to carry out their orders. Without armored vehicles or defenses, they simply advanced and filmed their apocalyptic entries into Pokrovsk at the end of 2025. These recordings circulated around the world and were geolocated by many, including the Ukrainians, who launched drones. Amid the fog while hunting the Russians, many soldiers hid when they heard the buzzing of the propellers. Several vehicles were found abandoned and even so ended up being destroyed to prevent their reuse. Some still contained vital supplies for the front. The soldier, distracted and who didn't seek cover in time, was eliminated along with his transport. Others who tried to follow the same route were located thanks to the images their own comrades shared. The kamikaze drone hit the target, recording the last moments of horror with a blurry camera. The pursuit on those roads was intense. The drones waited for the Russians to pass, whether in convoys or in isolated vehicles that smaller squads used to cross the death zone. The wreckage of equipment and men was scattered along the roads under the constant watch of the lenses which searched for new targets. Despite that, the Russians were inside the city, throwing grenades into buildings occupied by Ukrainians, and explosions soon filled the surroundings. Fire began to rise through the structures, saturating the air with the dark poison of combustion. To escape, the Ukrainians jumped through the windows, but they were already being followed by Russian drones. One of these devices coordinated the attack with a hidden soldier, who opened fire as soon as he saw the first figure. The others ran, saved only by the fact that the shooter was hasty and didn't wait for the group to advance. However, the relief didn't last long. The kamikazes kept chasing anyone who tried to hide. The explosions claimed another victim and forced the other to surrender. The Ukrainian surrenders happened in places where the Russian siege was complete, a result of infiltrations under the fog and aerial surveillance that cornered the defenders. The Russians started filming their incursions again, sometimes declaring victory too soon, but the reality was tougher. They marched under the fog, occupied houses, and gained territory. But the fighting in Pokrovsk was still far from over at the end of 2025. The Russians were so confident after taking Pokrovsk that a lone surrounded Ukrainian was able to use a clever strategy to survive. Two enemies were passing by when the soldier from Kiev spoke to them in Russian. They stopped hesitant. That's when the rifle of the Ukrainian appeared at the window and started spitting fire. The bullets tore the life out of the first Russian. The second ran, but the projectiles sank into his flesh. Only adrenaline kept his steps going until finally life gave out and he fell. The special forces made their way through the city, hunting the enemy. Part of the job was to locate the Russian hideouts and indicate where the Air Force should drop its bombs. From inside the houses, they waited for the opponents detected by the drones to pass by. The ambushes eliminated lone Russians who tried to move through Pokrovsk. The Ukrainians knew that the enemy had orders to advance relentlessly, taking buildings so that others could regroup at the same points. And they were, in fact, advancing and celebrating. Some pairs displayed destroyed Ukrainian vehicles as trophies. Meanwhile, Moscow's kamikazes flew over where defenders still remained, detonating concentration points to clear the way. Moscow knew that the shortage of Ukrainian troops in the city made it easier for lone soldiers to infiltrate through gaps in the defense. The movement of the Ukrainians under bombardment was anything but easy. They had to take shelter in any crevice that offered the slightest protection. They saw the kamikazes and Russian bombs hit the ground. Just ahead, the explosions battered the soldiers' bodies and made the ground shake. The air, saturated by the whistling of falling bombs and the buzzing of drones, seeped into the minds of the fighters. It was impossible to forget that nightmare brought into reality. At a certain point, the Russians tried to take a Ukrainian position. The soldiers from Kiev, realizing the situation, called for support over the radio. While they entrenched themselves in the building, the Russians surrounded it looking for a safe entry. Help for the defenders came from the sky. With the dive of the kamikazes, terrified and cornered, the invaders began to force their way in with grenades. Since the interior space was vast, the explosives were not enough, so they raised their rifles and started aiming inside. But it was clear by the way they crossed in front of the doors that their training for close-quarters combat was poor. They crossed the fallen door without bothering to clear the way for a possible retreat. The first one advanced and the second followed right behind, sticking close to his partner. When the shots came from inside, the first man was hit violently, unable to retreat properly because of his partner and the fallen door. A colleague still tried to pull him out of there heroically, and the second one stopped panting behind a pillar. A kamikaze drone appeared to reward the act. Another body, consumed by fire, fell. The survivors tried to hide, but the drones appeared to blow up defenses. Covered in dust and almost deaf, they tried the invasion once again. One of them, with his rifle lowered, tried to retreat into the darkness, but was met by Ukrainian fire. He fell, groaning, begging for help from a friend who hesitated. The fighting ended his doubt with a final explosion. Life was bitter for the Russians. Moscow celebrated victories, announcing meters gained among the ruins. But the front? The soldiers screamed in despair. Often all they had was a tourniquet to delay the end until a second drone ended their lives. Meanwhile, far from there, a politician was signing documents, medals were being minted, and enthusiasts were commenting about victories on the internet, ignoring the forgotten corpses on Ukrainian soil.
Leg. Tourniquet! Fuck! Where's the radio?
Guys, fuck.